You guys still believe in ivermectin? What is it about this molecule that's so special? Please let me know. You know how you tried to buy this drug? It was discovered in 1975. This is such a big molecule. How's it getting into any cell? Look how polar it is. How can it help cancer? It's not getting into any cells. So anyway, there's a lot of people who think ivermectin is useful. It's like a joke somebody told, people believed it, and it kept propagating. I mean, I'm hoping there's somebody here who can like speak to it or defend it.
Well, I'm under the impression that ivermectin stuns and kills parasites inside the body or inside the gut. And the majority of people in the U.S. have parasites in their gut.
This is a great hypothesis. You know what you do when you have a hypothesis like this?
Well, I'm reaching.
All right, wait. I'm just asking you. Do you know what happens in science when we have a hypothesis?
No, fill me in.
We test it. So you just came up with a theory. It's wrong, by the way, but possibly true. I know it not to be true, but regardless, the way you test this theory is you give 500 people ivermectin, you give 500 people placebo, and you see what happens. Instead of pretending you do the study and you find out. And unless you have a study that says it does it, we cannot assume or guess that it does. We assume that it doesn't do it until the study shows that it does. That is how the world works. Otherwise, we don't have a world that we can really live in and think through. This is the basic reasoning.
Has it not been proven that it's effective treatment on various parasitic diseases
Rare.
and studying them?
Of course, it's FDA approved for one very specific disease.
And the majority of Americans don't know this, but they do have parasites in their body.
The majority of Americans don't have.
Microbiomes are.
They don't have. First of all, you're wrong. The majority of Americans don't have the parasites that are treated by this drug. 1. 2, what does that have to do with cancer?
Well, I feel like it all stems from the microbiome.
Well, you can do a trial. You can do a clinical trial to see if it affects anything. Like I said, whatever you think it does, you can do a clinical trial where you put 500 patients on drug and 500 patients on placebo, and you see what happens after a year, or however many years, or whatever your prediction is. And let me guess, you've never done any of this in biopharma before. This is your first. No, this is your first time. Yeah.
Very, very little any information on it, other than me trying to. Only thing I know is like holistic health more of, and like trying to think of more natural ways of health.
Okay, there's people in the world that do this kind of thing for a living, where they look for drugs, they try to develop drugs. Some of them try to make money doing it, and we hunt meticulously throughout the world. I have people helping me to do this for medicines that could be used to help people and make us rich. I almost bought ivermectin completely.
You solving the issue will stop you from making money. Your customers.
No, we make the most money. I assume you're like 19 years old, but let me help you understand this. We make the most money when we make the most impact. You can't charge a lot of money for a cancer drug that doesn't work. You can't charge any money for a cancer drug that doesn't work, actually. And when you design drugs, you can't say, okay, stop. Let's just make it just good enough. Just good enough that it kind of helps, and they need to be addicted and take it forever. You're literally dangerous. You don't understand the way clinical medicine is conducted. You don't understand causal relationships, basic logical thinking. I'm stunned that there are people like this. You've never been in biopharma. You've never developed a drug. You've never invented a drug. You probably can't tell me what the valence of nitrogen is. But you want to start to pontificate about what's good medicine and what it isn't. What's wrong with people like you? Imagine thinking the pharmaceutical industry, which, by the way, is composed of millions of human beings. That
okay, can I just put my point in?
What is your point, other than embarrassing? Other than embarrassing yourself.
Back into history, pre-1900s, you see that everybody was using either a light frequency to heal you or.
You are. This has got to be a troll, right?
Yeah, I saw that clip and had the same exact reaction as you, and I like Joe Rogan, but that is literally going to get people killed. Just given his reach, just numbers, just 100%. I could see people going to their oncologist and asking for ivermectin. At best, it's an awkward conversation. They continue the treatments, but ivermectin's pretty easy to get on telehealth now.
That is so crazy. You probably don't know this, but I actually tried to buy this drug, which was called 𝗪𝗏, when Merck had it. And I had this mutual friend with Ken Frazier, and Merck really didn't want to sell it. And we offered this insane price. And they said they still wouldn't sell it because there were people at Merck way back when that were really proud of this drug and what it did from a humanitarian basis in Africa. I wanted to buy it, and you can imagine, raise the price dramatically, which this world would be so much funnier if that version of the multiverse actually happened. And
right now.
But no, in all seriousness, the another company.
Is it like, what was the name of the drug? Is it like a microtubule inhibitor? One of those like kind of albendazols?
𝗪𝗏𝗪? No, it's not like albendazole or anything like that. It's a lactone. It's very, very polar. So like stays in the body forever. And in essence, it just sort of gets to these bizarre, like, it really isn't a great drug. Like, it's not really clear even how it works, to be honest. It's just this very polar and toxic kind of molecule that it just seems to destroy parasites. Like a lot of these antiparasitics, like the other one is, it's got a very high log P. You're cutting out a little bit for me. It's very nonpolar. Sorry, it's got a polar center, but it's very nonpolar. It's like I said, its log P is around 6. But what's interesting is like all these other drugs, like for example, 𝗫𝗫𝗪 or praziquantel. You probably learned about that one in med school too. None of these drugs, it's really clear how they work, because parasites are not really like that well understood to begin with. So, some people say they're ion channel inhibitors. Some people, it's just not clear. Like a lot of these drugs, nobody even bothers to do the binding studies to even bother to see like what crystal structure, where it's bound through a crystal structure or something like that. So these drugs are a little bit mysterious, and they're not used that often in America, but it's just so sad to see people like decide to become their own doctor. I feel terrible. Like somebody needs to be the adult here and just lay down the law.
Honestly, I really appreciate you doing this. I have a mother-in-law who is exactly how you're describing, where she thinks she's like a medical expert, and she's been like basically radicalized by Instagram Reels, just seeing all this content over and over again, just scaring her and making her think that like everything's going to kill her. So honestly, I really appreciate you doing this, because we really need more pushback from.
Yeah, like I said, you never know what could happen in medicine. So like you just do a clinical trial. That's they did clinical trials of ivermectin in COVID. It didn't work. And you can do trials of ivermectin in cancer if you want. And those won't work either. So like moving the puck from COVID to cancer, even after trials have failed, is just so gross. Like, I understand not trusting authority. Like I am the poster child for not trusting authority. Like that's what I do. But, there's that, and then there's this just like wild misunderstanding of, and again, I think the first guy was a troll, but I think a lot of people believe what he's saying, which is that drug companies don't like curing diseases, which is, just, it's unfathomable mentally to think that there are actually people that believe that. And you can't imagine how many times I get that question of like, take an EGFR inhibitor, for example. If you have EGFR mutated non-small cell lung cancer, you know what protein is driving your tumor. You know exactly what is wrong with you. And scientists made a drug that stops that protein. It's just basically an EGFR inhibitor. And in fact, not only is that, but it stops the exact mutation that is resistant to the first generation EGFR mutants. You cannot make a better drug than this. It's exquisitely targeted to what's wrong with you. Ivermectin is not targeted to anything. It was made in 1975. They barely had these tools back then. So 50 years later, top scientists have made these drugs, and they work. The amazing response rate for the EGFR mutated non-small cell lung cancer is incredible, because it stops exactly what you need to stop. HIV is a similar scenario where HIV drugs are remarkable. The new 𝗫𝗏𝗪 from Gilead, it's a once every 6 months dose. You take it twice a year, and it keeps your HIV at bay, or it stops you from getting HIV in the first place if you're at risk. Medicine's incredible. And the people that do this kind of stuff have worked really hard. And it's so insulting when somebody like, Mel Gibson talking about ivermectin, Joe Rogan? Come on.
2 years ago, this probably would have been a death sentence. She was started, I already forgot the name of the drug, combination chemotherapy with one of these PD-1 inhibitors, not 𝗕𝗢𝗄𝗏, but it's another one. She's cancer-free, and it's January, which is insane.
That's great. Yeah, PD-1 was another miracle. There's a funny story there. Again, I had all this beef with Merck and Schering-Plough. Schering-Plough, my friends were at Schering-Plough, and they sold Schering-Plough to Merck. And they shared a drug, a statin combination called Vytorin. It was statin and a cholesterol reabsorption inhibitor called Zetia and ezetimibe, yeah. And obviously, the statin combination. So Merck bought out their partnership with Schering-Plough by buying out the whole company. But what they didn't realize is they were also buying one of the first PD-1 inhibitors. So they accidentally backed themselves into having the best cancer drug of all time. And, to their credit, they developed it. Yeah, give them credit. They developed it very vigorously. One of my friends, I actually tried to hire him to be the CEO of my drug company. He ended up very aggressively developing it. So it did become one of the world's best drugs through the hard work of people at Merck, but it wasn't intentional that they were to acquire it. But that's opportunity sometimes, they were prepared and they went after it when they had the chance. And, Keytruda has saved so many people's lives. So is Opdivo. And the amount of attention that Ivermectin gets versus drugs that actually work, it's just sad to me because there are real people that do this stuff and that work hard every day to make things better for themselves, their company, their families, their communities. Hundreds of thousands of people that work at Merck and Pfizer and Eli Lilly. Do you think they're monsters? Do you think they're idiots? Do you think they're all in a conspiracy? There's this huge conspiracy that nobody's talking about that somehow stayed secret in the labs of these companies. But meanwhile, people at these companies do die of cancer too, and parents too. It's just mind-bogglingly stupid. And again, there's no clear ivermectin supporter here that isn't trolling at least. That will engage in good faith because it's just too stupid. You can't. It's an untenable position.
They see that there's actually a website. It's 𝗫vmectin.com, I think. That it's an ongoing meta-analysis.
Not that meta-analyses are that great anyway. I mean,
𝗫vmectin. There's actually dozens of these studies. But
just give me one. Give me one study and I'll critique it. The thing about, and just so give me a second. Just give me a second. So just for anybody out there that doesn't know, there's clinical trial that's in human beings, and that's there's a certain kind of clinical trial that's the gold standard, which is a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study. Which, if I need to explain to you why that's a good thing, you should probably just not be involved in medicine at all. And then there's a preclinical study. So this is a study not in human beings. It can be in animals, it can be in cell lines and cell culture, but it's not in human beings. And you can imagine, you don't have to be a great scientist to see that the human clinical trial that's randomized and controlled is very useful, and that everything else is kind of not that useful, especially since you can kind of just make up that data and it doesn't mean much and it's just cell lines. So when you publish cell line data, I can go critique that stuff, but it's just not useful to publish some cell lines and say, okay, this is a great cancer drug, because there's thousands of drugs like that, maybe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. Every postdoc in the world has a drug that in a cell line looks like it's really great. And then when they do a human clinical trial, it doesn't look like it's so great. In fact, drug companies, for every single drug that does get FDA approved in cancer, they have about 100 or 200 ones that look great preclinically and that just don't work in humans, and they give up on them. And people like Vivek and myself made a living going around to these drug companies and buying their old drugs that they kind of overlooked and trying them again. This is what I do. Ivermectin is perfect for that. And the problem is it needs to work and it doesn't. So it's just
right. But
yeah.
But your average Joe can go to these websites and they see there's actually 52 ivermectin. According to this website, 52 ivermectin COVID-19 RCTs. Most of them are. The amount of junk research that's been published on this is just crazy. Most of these are in countries like India, Bangladesh, and so there's an interesting thing where it seems that a lot in the countries where a lot of these countries do actually have people have parasites.
I think that's kind of the tail wagging the dog.
And do you understand too that this is COVID, and now so Mel Gibson said, you know, my friends with stage 4 cancer. Okay, that's like saying like illness. Okay, like there's so many different types of cancer.
Yeah, he doesn't even understand what.
It's just
Yeah.
saying that is just that alone. Like he might as well just say
I just think it's all anecdotes.
It would have been a little bit smarter.
If you Google
if he
search
even
ivermectin
something.
cancer, there's one like Chinese study which, you know, is probably fake. Like
Just real quick, Luke. So I don't disagree with that necessarily. But what's funny about that is that this was a drug made by Merck. Like this is a big pharma drug.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know. Okay.
Merck invented and discovered ivermectin and got it FDA approved.
I think
it's off patent. It's off patent now, so it's
still
generics and stuff. Right?
Yeah, but it was still big pharma. I mean,
I think you're massively underestimating the extent to which this anti-big pharma narrative is promoted, you know, as young as elementary schools too. I mean, teachers are repeating this blather about the sick care system and all of this, and meanwhile, pharma's like not present.
well, what's funny is like,
It's very bad at
so let's say that's all true, and I don't disagree with you at all, and I think that is all true. What does ivermectin have to do with that? You know, like
I'll tell you exactly what it does.
that's the craziest part to me. Is like, hate big pharma all you want, but why is ivermectin relevant?
It's all about the who. That's what it is. It's that these people have antipathy for people like Anthony Fauci, and yet they might like, let's say, Jim Jordan, and they just think about it in terms of personality.
Yeah. It's not
clinical trials or anything else. Just like they think about sports.
It's it's the wrong team. It's Yankees or Red Sox.
Yeah, that's what explains.
You want to be scientific? You want to be scientific? I'll be anti-scientific. You know, I like ivermectin instead of the drugs that are proven to work. Like, but to me, it's like saying, okay, if there's a Democrat, my plumber is a Democrat. I look at my toilet, and even though I can understand medicinal chemistry and crystallography, I look at my toilet and I'm getting very confused very quickly, even though there's like 2 components to it. But what if my plumber was a Democrat, I should say, and I'm a Republican, my plumber comes in and says, Martin, I'm going to fix your toilet, and I see he has a Bernie sticker or something. I don't say, stop right there. You don't know how to fix my toilet. And the guy's been fixing toilets for 20 years. He fixed my buddy's toilet. I say, Snow, get out of here. What were you going to do to my toilet? You're going to turn this thing left? Well, I'm going to turn it right. You know, you don't know toilets because you like Democrats and you don't know how to fix this toilet. And the reality is, of course, the guy knows how to fix the toilet. We may not agree on politics, but this is what he does for a living. I don't fix toilets for a living. Like I said, I look at these things and get very confused very quickly because it's not what I know. And, you know, the guy knows how to do it. He knows what's clogged up or whatever. And I'd rather let him do it, even though I don't like Bernie Sanders a lot, than sit there and have my toilet stink up the house all day and not work ever again because I wanted to turn it left instead of right.
I think the issue too is like the pharma side of this that communicates, you know, the truth about R&D and this and the other. It's a nameless, faceless communications campaign. Like you can't summon the face of the person who's there to tell you that, you know, what a clinical trial is. You can't think of
there's no pharma bro that could actually be that, you know. I think that one of the funny things that happens here is that I'm sure you guys have heard of this phrase that you could have convictions loosely held. And some people say, you know, they have a strongly held conviction. Well, this is a situation where everyone has a loosely held conviction. If you get diagnosed with stage 3 EGFR mutant positive non-small cell lung cancer and you go to your oncologist, you are absolutely not getting ivermectin. That guy's going to give you the exact drug that's molecularly tailored for your cancer. You're going to be happy. You're going to be cancer-free. If you want to go about it the Steve Jobs way, you want to go about some other way, you know, you can do that. And you can have that strongly held conviction. But in reality, the doctor is going to look at you and say, do you want to live 18 months with a chance to live 6 years? Or do you want to live 6 months? And you can take your pick. Nobody's going to stop you, you know, at the end of the day. You know, you can die for your principles all you want. Anyway, doctor, please.
No, it's all good. I was going to say, ultimately, this is like a systematic thing that has occurred over the course of the last 5 years. And it has a lot more to do with the fact that everybody became an epidemiologist suddenly during the pandemic. Everybody thinks that they understand how things work suddenly during the pandemic. And even taking a step back, it's saying, hey, how do you discredit everything? Well, you discredit the fact that papers are completely made up. Now, everybody that's in the actual industry and is actually taking care of patients knows that, of course, papers have trouble with being reproduced. We know that the Nature study, I don't think I saw it, but 33% of papers can be reproduced. Makes sense. and clinical trials have their own issues, and there's a lot of corruption in the FDA. I don't think anybody here will say it's not true. But if you're asking for so much evidence and you're asking for so much backing into, well, why should we take, for example, something really controversial like the COVID vaccine for some people, right? Sure. But then, like, why are we not asking the same questions of the supplement industry? Why aren't we asking the same questions of ivermectin? You know, the one really good meta-analysis on ivermectin actually showed that metformin was better for COVID than ivermectin.
That makes sense.
It was a really well-done study.
Well,
isn't that ironic? That, like, literally the one major, it was McMaster's and Brazil, they did a large study. They showed that fluvoxamine and metformin were actually better at early treatment than ivermectin.
Yeah, nobody's trying to get metformin or fluvoxamine. But real quick, I mean, one thing I'd say is that, you know, I would push back pretty heavily on some of the stuff you said. You know, preclinical studies are very hard to replicate. Scientists have NIH grants. There was this recent controversy I was involved in called 𝗐𝗍𝗫 Sciences, where there was this huge amount of fraud. In fact, the unprecedented step of a PI getting arrested by the FBI and getting charged with fraud to get NIH grants was really unprecedented. An old Chinese guy pulled out of his lab by FBI agents over doctoring published data. You know, as you said, in the industry, we kind of are used to preclinical studies being fraudulent or you know, kind of like not replicatable at least. But I'm sorry, when it comes to clinical trials, I get paid basically to scrutinize clinical trials, analyze them really carefully, and make a bet. And clinical trial publications are usually very robust. Pharmaceutical companies, clinical trials, when they're published, you're in the middle of my sentence. Pharmaceutical clinical trials that get published are very close to 100% reliable. But the thing with that one is the results were not questioned. When they published those results, they showed a modest effect. It was really the FDA that made that one controversial. It's not the sanctity of the actual results. The results were published in New England. They were what they were. They were very
there were barely any results.
barely useful. So, like, to me, that's not a failure of the publication apparatus. That's a failure of the FDA. In that case, 1 in a million, where they kind of said, well, there are two ways to look at medicine. They sort of looked at it as two ways. And I see this all the time in medicine, especially in rare and tough diseases where there's no treatments. The FDA says, okay, we can either say no, yet again, for every one of these ALS drugs, every one of these Alzheimer's drugs, every one of these drugs for Duchenne muscular dystrophy where children are dying, or we can say, you know what, let's give it a conditional approval on, contingent on a large phase 3 that will be done probably never, but to do it again. And I think that, there is a side of the FDA that thinks that way, this right to try movement. It's up to the doctor to decide, is this right for my patient? Not so much up to FDA always. And, I sympathize very small amount with that. They should not have approved Aduhelm. And now what was funny about Aduhelm is even though it was approved, nobody used it. All the doctors said, yeah, I know this thing doesn't work. I read the New England Journal paper. I'm not going to use it. Fuck that. And Biogen couldn't sell any of it. So, their new drug does work. And they're still having trouble selling that one because of the overhang of Aduhelm. So it's funny, the amyloid beta antibodies are actually probably should be being used more often, at least the donanemab and the other Biogen one, lecanemab. But it's funny that the aducanumab disaster kind of has clouded that whole class of drugs, even though the donanemab data are pristine and published and nobody doubts that they work. So to me, I think that the stuff on replicatability is really important, but a good phase 3 trial that works will get published in a top journal. And the only articles I saw in the New England Journal for any of these drugs show that they didn't work, like ivermectin and fluvoxamine and so forth. Like there would be 100-patient study that just randomly, if you do a study, like randomly one side will look better than the other. And then when they did the big study failed. But if you're some weirdo conspiracy theorist, you want to say, this is because of Illuminati, big pharma, etc. When the reality is, like, if you meet these big pharma people, none of them could conjure a conspiracy to save their life. especially not one involving hundreds of clinical trial sites with a double-blind, CRO-controlled, like, so you're telling me the CRO's involved, Big Pharma's involved, Illuminati's involved, government's involved, and they're all to fix a clinical trial? Maybe the drug just doesn't work because it was invented in 1975. It doesn't do anything.